This is the view of Brazil from the terrace of the Finance Ministry in Rio de Janeiro. A revolution overthrew President João Goulart here last month. Tolerance towards communism and corruption were the charges raised by the military against Mr. Goulart, who is now in exile in Uruguay. Hundreds of political prisoners are being held. Some 300 are in that white ship in the harbor. A new regime is in power with military backing. I am Juan Dionis of the New York Times. We are now going to talk to Minister of Planning Roberto Campos, one of the key figures in the new government. Mr. Campos is a former ambassador of Brazil in the United States and one of the architects of the Alliance for Progress.
National Educational Television presents At Issue, a commentary on events and people in the news. At Issue this week, The View from Brazil. First, a look at the political and economic stakes of Brazil's revolution as seen by Roberto Campos, the new Minister of Planning. Then, a look at the revolution as part of Brazil's history and the character of its people with Érico Veríssimo, one of Brazil's major novelists. Minister Campos is interviewed by Juan Dionis and Nathan Miller of the Baltimore Sun.
Dr. Campos, the movement that overthrew President João Goulart last month included in a very leading role the armed forces. The new president is President Castelo Branco, is a retired Army Marshal, and we hear a lot of talk about the high command of the armed forces in a background role. Could you tell us, is this a military regime?
I would say not. In the first place, the armed forces were the instrument, but they really did not provide the motivation. I would say that this is basically a middle-class revolution, and the motivation is certainly not military. And even if the present leader is a military man, he has, of course, been elected by Congress. One of the reasons being that there was so much factional bitterness as among the politicians that it would not be easy to select a leading civilian who would be at the same time a national personality and free from the rather bitter divisions that have afflicted our political life in recent months.
Well, there are a lot of political prisoners being held now, almost nearly a month since the revolution. They can't get bail. The courts say that this is a revolutionary situation. And it's said that that there was a very large subversive penetration in the Goulart government. How important was the communist influence on the Goulart government?
Probably rather substantial, even though quite often confusion is made between communists and other strands of the left. There was a substantial influence of the communists, but this was really a fairly narrow escape from a situation where a tiny minority of communists manipulating instruments of persuasion and propaganda were creating a situation in which the economy was no longer viable, and the economy being no longer viable, the political system could no longer survive.
Could you tell us how far this purge is going to go and how long it's going to last?
This is really not my province, since I'm really Minister of Coordination and Planning. I think there was an initial moment of revolutionary fervor in which some excesses were committed. But those excesses clearly are much less than those which would be committed were it not for the fact that this march into economic chaos and destruction of democratic rights were to continue. And in fact, I don't think the Americans should be particularly self-righteous on this score. Mao Zedong, who is quite an authority, I believe, on revolutions, once said that a revolution is not an invitation for a banquet. Despite the fact that there has been a revolution here. All in all, I would say that the amount of violence and bloodshed in the rather vital confrontation of democratic tendencies of the West with the leftist tendencies, despite the basic character of this confrontation, that there has been less violence and bloodshed in Brazil than there has been in the United States on the Negro issue. Mm-hmm. And clearly the Negroes there are not enemies of democracy. So we have managed to surmount this crisis practically without bloodshed, with very little, if any, physical violence. And I would say even with less deprivation of civil rights than there has been for years in the United States on this question of the racial issue, which surely does not expose you, democracy, to any inner danger.
Well, what about the economic chaos, Dr. Campos? This is an area where you are very directly concerned. What about this violent inflation and the problem represented by the slowdown or practically the paralyzation of development in Brazil with the violent increase in inflation? What is the new government going to do to remedy or face these problems?
Well, I'm glad that you have now switched to a more congenial subject to me. I'm not a politician so far. I expect to enter the political game. I have been much more of a humble technician. I think politics is, to a certain extent, at least the cynical Brazilians say, merely the art of making today the mistakes of tomorrow. So I would rather confine myself to technical subjects. Well, in a recent cabinet meeting, I have tried to interpret and make a diagnosis of the situation. I think there are four crises, really. The inflationary crisis, which is serious since the pace of inflation has been accelerating in the last few years, from roughly 40% per year in 1961 to over 50% in 1962 and over 80% in 1963. The second crisis, the crisis of stagnation. This has been the unusual thing in Brazilian history. Throughout, we have been maintained a fairly substantial rate of growth in the post-war period in the face of rather severe inflation. But in the last couple of years, we have had inflation with stagnation, and that is the disconcerting novelty for the Brazilians, although it's not an unusual experience by any means in the world at large. The third problem is the problem of balance of payments, a rather acute foreign exchange crisis. The fourth crisis is what I would call the crisis of motivation. It is the entrepreneurial group that has not been acting vigorously and was feeling a bit intimidated by the uncertainty of economic policies. So the crisis, the frustration of the working groups who had been seduced and lured by false promises that could not be fulfilled. It's finally the lack of constructive motivation of certain volatile groups, such as the student group, that does not find any constructive channel for the idealistic energy. Those are the four crises. What has to be done about them? It's really a complex of measures. On inflation, the recipe has to be a curtailment of government expenditures as one of the principal means of curbing budgetary deficits of the government, a fiscal reform to increase revenues, some amount of international assistance, a major effort at increasing food productivity, agricultural productivity in the short run, and so on.
Dr. Campos, there was much talk in the Goulart administration about agrarian reform, but very little action. Could you tell us what the new government plans to do in this field, which is so vital for Brazil?
The government has already announced its intention of going ahead with the realistic and democratic land reform. By realistic, I mean a land reform that takes into account the enormous variety of regional conditions. We have areas in which the problem is not really the existence of big latifundia, but the contrary, dwarf holdings and small plots that render impossible an increase in agricultural productivity. In still other areas we have latifundia, but transportation is so difficult, so scarce, and the population so scant that really latifundia based on extensive livestock raising is the normal form of economic exploitation. We have other areas in which there is the typical problem of pressure on land, and on which we have a number of solutions to study. First, progressive taxation of land holdings. The tax system on land is obsolete. It's not geared to land reform, to promote the parcellation of land, and certainly a major refurbishing of the tax system is necessary. Secondly, some expropriation must take place, not only for economic reasons, but also as a social sedative. There is such an amount of bitterness and frustration in certain areas that you have to resort to expropriation, not so much because of its economic importance, because presumably, given a certain amount of investment, one could develop colonization schemes to take off the pressure from the land, but as some sort of a social sedative. Then we have colonization schemes. We still have vast unoccupied tracts of territory. This would indicate that the solution is complex. We have no simple formula for land reform in a vast country such as ours. But what I must say is that there is seriousness now in this purpose, and I shall devote my energies in the next couple of weeks to try to draft a legislative program for successive steps of land reform.
Apparently, about half of Brazil's 75 million people now live in cities, and there's a steady flow of people moving from rural areas to urban employment. What does the government have in mind in the way of urban reform?
The approach to the problem of urban reform will be largely through the restoration of incentives for popular saving designed specifically to housing. Secondly, the channeling of savings from other groups into popular housing. There will always be necessary government intervention at several levels. First, the government must provide some rediscount facilities for the paper which is going to be sold to the public. The government may subsidize, but to a limited extent, the real low-cost housing. Self-help methods under the technical supervision of the government will have to be developed. But I think we can break the back of the problem if we, for a while, establish in favor of investment in popular housing, something which is now a privilege in Brazil, but ought to be normal. Namely, the ability to protect the investor in this field against the effects of inflation, and the legal authorization to require from whoever buys a house to pay real installments, installments in money that's expected for inflation, so that the capital is returned to permit a sort of revolving fund for expansion of popular housing.
Dr. Campos, if things had turned out otherwise and the revolution had failed, what do you think would have happened to you?
Hopefully, I might survive in ostracism. Conceivably, I might be shot. Violent leftist revolutions are not known for their tenderness to the defeated.
Dr. Campos, the new government, which did win, has promised that new presidential elections will be held on October 3rd, 1965, and a new government will take over in January 1966. Do you think the present government has enough time to do all it has set out to do, or will it have to continue in power?
I think the president means what we say is to turn over the government. We shall make time. We shall try to expedite the process of recovery. All that we can say at this moment is that to this purpose we shall bend our energy, and we hope to turn over the country to the new government in better shape than that in which we received it.
Dr. Campos, thank you very much. It's been very interesting.
Thank you, Juan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Rio Grande do Sul, southernmost of Brazil's 22 states, stretches 350 miles from the Atlantic Ocean to the border of Argentina. The area is famous for the cattle and wine it produces, but its capital, Porto Alegre, is an industrial city of 650,000 people, resembling Cleveland. Deposed President Goulart fled here to make his last stand against the Revolutionary Army, but the leftist counter-revolt he hoped to rally quickly evaporated. Goulart's visible supporters now fill the Porto Alegre jails, and the army guards the airports and roads to cut off the escape route Goulart took to Uruguay. Porto Alegre is also the home of Érico Veríssimo, one of Brazil's major novelists. In his garden, Veríssimo reflects on the revolution in an interview with Al Perlmutter.
What changes have you observed in social attitudes of social consciousness in Brazil over the years?
In the last 30 years, we have become more political conscious in this country because, in great part, the writers became socially conscious. In the beginning, we used to write like the French, discuss Voltaire, Chateaubriand, but only after 1930 we discovered Brazil in literature. Then we saw the social mess, the poverty, the social injustice, the inequality among the people, and from the northeastern part of the country came many novelists depicting this situation in their novels. People like Jorge Amado, José Lins do Rego, Graciliano Ramos, they were all realists. They were considered leftists because they were concerned with the underdog. Some of them were communists, but not all of them. And I am sure that they helped very much the people in understanding the Brazilian situation and in becoming socially conscious and politically conscious too.
Do you think the revolution of a few weeks ago is the latest evidence?
Well, it's very complicated. I don't think I could explain the situation in 10 minutes or 10 hours or 10 days. This revolution delivered us from a very terrible nightmare, but we are still inside a bad dream, in my opinion. As you know, I'm a Democrat, and I think that a democracy, even a bad one, is the only way to a good democracy. But I have great hopes in this government because of the president. He's a very decent fellow, a scholar, an intelligent man, and a good man. But I would like to see the democratic regime really restored in Brazil. I understand that the situation is bad. The progress of the extreme left is very great. They are trying to dismount the revolutionary machine in Brazil. I had no interference in this whole business. I think this is the time to stay silent and see what is going to happen. But in a few days, I think that all writers in Brazil should be speaking and writing to ask for the reforms that Brizola and Jango wanted. But for good reason, for better reasons, you know, because I didn't believe they really wanted those reforms.
You're thinking in terms of writers speaking out as writers but without political affiliation?
Some of them have political affiliation. I don't. I don't think a writer should belong to any party. The party line is very dangerous for any writer, especially for fiction writers. But I think that the land reform is necessary and very difficult. Look at Russia. In 40 years, they didn't do much, having all the liberty and the freedom of changing people from place to place, sending people to jail and even killing people in the name of land reform. Look at the state of Russian agriculture today.
Do you think Brazil's problems are primarily internal, or do you think they are greatly affected by external influences?
Well, today it's impossible not to be affected by external influence. But our problem is also internal. It's very, very grave an internal problem. We should now enter a period of austerity. Avoid exporting dollars. We have been exporting dollars for a long time, and too many dollars. We have too many people, many Brazilians abroad getting their salary in dollars. They don't do much. They are not really necessary. They should be called back home. And we should produce more, and we should produce jobs in order to avoid people to look for jobs with the government.
Do you think Brazilian officials have shown themselves to be good managers of Brazil's money?
No, very bad ones. They have been grafters, most of them, unfortunately. I'm being very candid. And I think we should have a change. I would like, for instance, to see Ademar de Barros and Juscelino Kubitschek back as governors or president.
How do you evaluate America's activities in Brazil? The State Department, for example.
Well, I think they have made many bad mistakes. In my opinion, maybe I'm wrong. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to speak my mind. I think that many times the Department of State has shaped the American foreign policy according to the interests of small groups, the big business, and not according to the interest of the United States as a leading nation that has more than technical aid and money to give the world. We need the United States, but we need also a change in the pace and the shape of this relationship. I don't know what's going to be done. It's not easy, but it has to be done. You can't imagine that the number of people in this country and in most Latin American countries who are very much against the United States. Some for wrong reasons and some for right reasons. You Americans are in a very bad spot. It's not easy, it's not cheap to be an American.
How would you like to see the United States' role developed in relation to Brazil?
I'd like them to understand us better, to get in touch not only with businessmen, with the so-called commercial elite, but also with artists, students, and with people in general. The real Brazil. Those people don't represent Brazil. I mean, the big shots of the industrial world, the bankers, they are important in this type of society, but they are not really the people.
You said before that Americans are disliked for both the right reasons and the wrong reasons. Could you give some examples of both?
Well, I'm not happy to ask that question, but I'm going to answer. I'm trying to. Well, you cannot expect that poor people like rich people. They think that the good qualities you have are taken for granted because you are rich, and your defects are magnified. For this reason you are not liked, and I think it's not a good reason. But there are good ones. For instance, you never try, I mean, in general, there are how many millions today? 190 million?
180, 190.
Well, I couldn't say that all Americans are like this. But you don't try to understand people. You just are very much in love with the American way of life and with your idea of time. And you think that everybody should be the same way. In my opinion, there are many more ways of life which are as good or better than the American one. If not for Americans, at least for other people. This lack of understanding has led your politicians to make big mistakes with Latin American countries. It's very difficult, as I've told you before, to be an American because leadership is very expensive in terms of dollars and in terms of human relations, in terms of work, preoccupation. I wouldn't like to be in your shoes.
I would like to find out who the people are who are in Brazilian shoes. Could you trace for us briefly the regions and temperaments in Brazil?
Well, Brazil is a patchwork quilt. We have one language, which is a miracle, with so many, the means of communication, transportation are so poor, and still we have one language, no dialects. But we have also a common denominator in temperament. It's kindness, friendliness, a little of irresponsibility, you know. If you take people in the northeastern part of the country, they are different in one respect. They are not so well fed as we are in the southern part of the country. The land is not very friendly. They are in a permanent fight with an environment. They have droughts, but they are tough, and they are very imaginative. The best writers and artists of Brazil come from the north of the country. Here we have a tremendous influence of German and Italian blood. We have many Germans and Italian immigrants coming since last century to this part of Brazil. You can find more blonde people. Don't take me as an example. I'm not for exportation. No. Of blonde people in this city of Porto Alegre. And if you go to Minas Gerais, you find people who are kind of sly. They are very good politicians. They have a slow sense of humor. They are careful. They don't trust in foreigners, you see. But if you go to Rio, you'll find a very gay people, extroverted, and they don't like very much to work. But a little distance from Rio, you are in São Paulo. They work and they make money and they are preoccupied with their future. They are just like Americans. And it's still the same country, and geographically there's not much difference in landscape between São Paulo and Rio. And you have so many different types of people.
As writers evaluate the past, they also look to the future.
Yes.
What are your hopes for Brazil's future?
Well, I have great hopes and great plans for Brazil in the future. I think no matter what happens now, in the next 10 years, we are going to be one of the great powers of the world. We have everything, including luck. And I hope you Americans help us in the right way.
What is the right way?
The right way is the right way. Try to find out.
Thank you very much.
I thank you.
This is NET, National Educational Television.